Mara Whitfield sat on the front porch of her aunt and uncle's old farmhouse, staring at the sun as it dipped behind the rolling fields. The late afternoon air was warm, carrying the sweet scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut hay. Cicadas buzzed lazily in the tall grass, and a light breeze teased the hem of her faded jeans. She sipped iced tea from a tall glass, setting it down whenever a ripple of memory washed over her. Memories of family gatherings in the big Whitfield house always made her heart ache a little. She was there sometimes, but never quite part of the laughter or the stories. Her aunt, Joanne, had raised her after Mara's mother, Lily, died when Mara was only 8 years old. Joanne was Lily's older sister, kind and patient but always careful. In her polite way, she had never made Mara feel unwanted. And yet Mara could not shake the feeling that something was missing. At every Whitfield reunion, her cousins would play games in the yard, teasing each other and swapping secrets that Mara could never share. She watched them from a distance, drawn to their easy closeness, yet painfully aware of her own role as an outsider. Mara had asked once, when she was old enough to talk straight, why she had never been mentioned in the family will, or in the family photo albums. Joanne had paused before answering, her eyes soft but sad. "Your grandmother had her reasons," she said. "Some things are better left unspoken." Mara hadn't argued. She was only 13 and still learning how to hold her own questions. Yet that answer, or non-answer, settled over her like a gray cloud that never quite lifted. Over the years, she had learned to live with her place on the margins. She did well in school, earning a scholarship to the state university where she studied art history. She painted quietly in her tiny apartment, filling canvases with bright flowers and peaceful landscapes, worlds she controlled, unlike her own tangled family story. Graduating with honors, she dreamed of returning to her hometown to open a small gallery in an old brick building downtown. Joanne and her uncle Peter had promised their support, proud of the young woman Mara had become. Despite their promises, Mara felt the old ache each time she visited Whitfield gatherings. Plates of fried chicken, dimples of mashed potatoes, and bowls of buttered corn lined the long family table. Her cousins passed dishes back and forth as they filled their plates, chatted over shared jokes, and divided the last slice of cherry pie. Mara would catch their eyes for a moment, but they always turned away, their laughter continuing as if she were a stranger. She forced a smile and nodded at the polite questions. "How's work?" "When's the gallery opening?" she answered, but she felt adrift, a visitor in her own bloodline. Then one morning, a letter arrived from the law offices of Delgado and Partners. The envelope bore the Whitfield family seal, embossed in gold. Mara's heart raced as she slid it open. Inside, the letter was brief. She was requested to attend a reading of her grandmother Eleanor Whitfield's life insurance policy the following week, to be held at the law firm's conference room in town. All named beneficiaries, both primary and contingent, would be present. Mara's breath caught. She read the words twice, then 3 times, as if the more she read them, the more real they would become. Had her place at that table been omitted, by mistake? Or was this simply a formality? A courtesy extended to her before the attorney read the names she already knew would be called. Her stomach knotted as she thought of the cousins, Marcy, Jenna, and Dale, who would surely sit smugly beside her, waiting for their names to be read and hers to be skipped. Mara closed her eyes and breathed deeply, remembering tips Joanne had taught her for staying calm. Focus on what she could control, speak her truth when the time was right, and above all, be honest with herself. On the day of the meeting, Mara, dressed carefully in a simple navy blue dress and matching flats. She wore her hair pulled back, choosing strength over comfort. The drive through town felt surreal. She passed the small coffee shop where she had sat for hours sketching last summer, the old movie theater now shuttered and silent, and the hill where, as a child, she'd chased fireflies with her cousins. Each landmark seemed to whisper at her, pulling her back into memories she had tried so hard to move beyond. Arriving at Delgado and Partners, she climbed the stone steps to the polished wood front door. The receptionist greeted her with a professional smile, offering water and a seat in the waiting area. Mara took a seat on a dark leather chair, her knees pressed together and her hands folded neatly in her lap. Through the glass wall, she could see her cousins gathered around a large mahogany table exchanging small talk. Their voices were low but full of their usual warmth with one another. Mara's throat tightened. She realized she could still remember how their laughter sounded when it included her. Mr. Delgado, the family attorney, appeared and beckoned Mara into the room. He was a tall man, his dark hair streaked with silver, wearing a crisp gray suit. "Ms. Whitfield," he said kindly, "thank you for arriving on time. Please join the others." Mara nodded, her voice caught somewhere between relief and fear. She rose and crossed the carpeted floor, the cousins watching as she took the empty seat at the far end of the table. The old clock on the wall ticked quietly as Mr. Delgado opened the policy file. The air smelled slightly of polished wood and freshly printed paper. Mara felt as if she could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. One by one, he read the clauses. The coverage amount, the conditions of the policy, the definitions of primary beneficiaries. Mara listened carefully, her throat dry. Each name he spoke was someone else's, her cousins and then their children, listed under contingent beneficiaries should the primary ones be unable or unwilling to accept. Mara clenched her hands in her lap, her nails pressing into her palms. She tried to picture the clauses as part of some legal ritual, a dance she did not understand. Her eyes flicked to her cousins, who sat with polite expressions. Marcy tapped her fingers on the table. Jenna exchanged a quick glance with Dale, and Dale offered Mara a brief, uncertain nod. It was almost funny how they waited for his next breath, sure that her name would not be called. Mara closed her eyes, for a moment letting herself feel the familiar sting of being left out. When Mr. Delgado reached the section on contingent beneficiaries, he paused and shuffled the papers. In the event that no primary beneficiary is living or is disqualified, the entire policy shall be distributed to... His voice trailed off as he looked down and Mara's heart lurched. A quiet hush fell over the room. Mara lifted her eyes, expecting the next words to name a cousin's child she barely knew. Instead, she heard the sound of her own name, clear and unmistakable. The room seemed to tilt, and for a moment Mara felt as though she were floating above it. The cousins' polite masks slipped, revealing surprise, confusion, even a flicker of guilt. She blinked, startled to find tears gathering in her eyes. Mr. Delgado continued reading, but Mara heard nothing further. Her mind replayed her mother's laughter, the soft lullabies she barely remembered, and the long summer she had spent wandering these same fields, feeling lonely but hopeful. When the reading concluded, there was a pause so long that the ticking clock sounded loud. Then Mara exhaled, a sound of release and disbelief. The room shifted around her as her cousins processed what they had just heard. Marcy's mouth opened, then closed again. Jenna swallowed hard. Dale ran a hand through his hair. Each of them wrestled with their own thoughts about what this meant for their shared past and uncertain future. Mara sat there, speechless but not afraid. The old gray cloud that had hovered above her for so many years began to thin, letting in a soft ray of light. She realized that she had been more than a name on a page or a distant memory. She had always been part of this story, waiting for her moment to be acknowledged. And now, as she sat in that polished conference room, she felt the long-lost promise of belonging settle in her chest like a warm ember, ready at last to glow. ChatGPT said. The room felt warmer than it had moments before. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles of light across the polished wood floor. Mara Whitfield sat at the far end of the table, her back straight, her hands resting lightly on its smooth surface. Around her, the faces of her cousins reflected a mixture of anticipation and polite confidence. They sat in identical high-backed chairs, their knees almost touching under the table, each one sure that this moment would confirm what they already believed. Mara Whitfield would not be named in the policy. Mr. Delgado tapped the file with his silver pen. The sound echoed softly. He adjusted his spectacles and began. His voice was calm, measured, as he read aloud the first lines, the policy number, the date of issue, The name of the insured, Eleanor Whitfield. Mara's heart fluttered when she heard her grandmother's name. It was familiar and distant, a name she had whispered in her dreams but rarely spoke aloud when awake. She watched Mr. Delgado's lips move with each careful syllable. $150,000 in coverage, he read, subject to the terms and conditions contained herein. He paused, looking at his papers as if recalling where he had left off. Mara's cousins leaned forward, elbows on the table, their eyes fixed on him. Marcy's curls bounced slightly as she shifted in her seat. Jenna tapped her pen against her notepad, and Dale's foot moved in a quick, restless rhythm under them, a table. None of them glanced at Mara. She noticed this and felt a quiet pang. Even here, where they should all have shared curiosity and surprise, they held her at arm's length. Mr. Delgado continued, his voice rising and falling like a gentle wave. He spoke of definitions: insured, beneficiary, contingent, beneficiary. He noted the clause that defined who would receive the money if the primary beneficiary could not accept it. Each term felt foreign to Mara, as though the words themselves belonged to a different world. Yet she listened intently, determined not to miss a single sentence. Her mother's voice seemed to whisper at the edge of her mind. Pay attention, Mara. Know your history. As the reading progressed, the cousins exchanged little glances. Marcy smiled politely at Jenna, as if sharing a private joke. Jenna's eyes sparkled with excitement. Dale, always the quiet one, cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair, as though to brace himself for the confirmation of what he expected. Mara watched them, curious about their reactions. She had seen these same expressions at every family gathering, whether around the dinner table or on holiday afternoons. Their closeness seemed absolute, as if nothing could break their bond. But now a simple document threatened to shift their secure world. The moment felt suspended in time. The polished wood table, the leather chairs, the soft hum of the air conditioner, they all faded around Mara, leaving only the sound of Mr. Delgado's clear, professional voice. He read a clause about accidental death, then another about policy. Lapsy. Mara's cousins nodded at these details, as if confirming information they already expected. Mara herself felt her pulse slow, her breathing deepen. She recalled her Aunt Joanne's advice. When you face hard news, keep your mind steady. Listen fully before you react. With each clause, the tension in the room grew. Mara noticed her own hands gripping the table's edge, white-knuckled. She released her grip, letting her fingers relax. She thought of her childhood memories, her mother's warm kitchen, her aunt's gentle kindness, the long summer evenings spent chasing fireflies in these same fields. Those memories steadied her, giving her the calm she needed. She reminded herself that whatever came next, she was ready to hear it. Then Mr. Delgado set the policy aside and looked up. His eyes swept over the gathered family, pausing briefly on each person. We will now read the primary beneficiaries, he said. These individuals are the first to receive the proceeds of the policy upon the insured's passing. Marcy's shoulders straightened. Jenna's pen paused over her notepad. Dale's foot stopped tapping. They knew their names would be there. Mara looked down at her own lap, her fingers tracing the seam of her dress, her stomach tightening. 1. Marcy Louise Whitfield, daughter of Eleanor Whitfield, 1/3 share. 2. Jennifer Ann Whitfield, daughter of Eleanor Whitfield, 1/3 share. 3. Charles Dalton Whitfield, grandson of Eleanor Whitfield, 1/3 share. Each line was met with a soft intake of breath. Marcy exhaled with relief. Jenna smiled broadly. Dale rested his chin on his hand, nodding thoughtfully. Mara lifted her head slowly, meeting their eyes for the first time. She saw genuine happiness, maybe even a spark of triumph. But she also saw a flicker of pity in Marcy's eyes, as if Marcy expected Mara to appear grateful just to be in the room. Mr. Delgado continued, if any of these primary beneficiaries are not living or are disqualified under Section 4A, then the proceeds will pass to the contingent beneficiaries. We will now read Section 3, followed by Section 4. Mara leaned forward. Her heart thundered in her chest. She could almost hear the soft click of her own blood pulsing at her temples. Mr. Delgado's voice flowed over words she barely understood. Contingent beneficiaries, heirs at law, per stirpes distribution. But she caught one phrase clearly. The entire policy shall be distributed to. He paused again, a slight hesitation that felt like an invitation. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, recalling her aunt's words about staying calm and focused. Behind her eyelids, she saw her mother's face, smiling as she tucked a strand of hair behind Mara's ear. She saw herself as a little girl, standing beside her grandmother's chair looking up with wide eyes. She felt a warm glow of belonging, as if her grandmother's spirit hovered in this room, present and loving. Mara opened her eyes, preparing herself for whatever came next. She would not flinch no matter what. Mr. Delgado inhaled softly, then exhaled. To Mara Elaine Whitfield, niece of Eleanor Whitfield, the entire contingent share. His voice was steady, but the words struck the room like a gentle bell tolling. Silence stretched out, vast as the summer sky. Mara felt her breath catch in her throat. Her cousins stared at each other, their faces frozen in surprise. Marcy's hand paused mid-air. Jenna's pen slipped from her fingers. Dale's chin dropped, his mouth parting in astonishment. It was as if the room had been turned upside down and they were all clinging to the ceiling, waiting to see how gravity would act. Mara sat motionless at first, her mind racing but her body still. The long-held belief that she did not belong here, under this roof, around this table, in this family legacy, dissolved in that single moment. She felt tears gather in her eyes, not of sadness but of relief and wonder. Mr. Delgado continued reading the remaining clauses, but to Mara they were words on paper, no longer barriers to her place in the family. Her gaze rested on the wood, grain of the table warm and solid. She reached out, touching the surface, and felt its steady strength beneath her fingers. When the reading ended, Mr. Delgado closed the file with a soft snap. "That concludes the life insurance policy of Eleanor Whitfield," he announced. "Congratulations to all beneficiaries." The uncomplicated warmth in his voice wrapped around Mara like a soft blanket. Her cousins looked at her with new eyes, curious, unsure, perhaps even a little envious. But Mara felt only a quiet joy. She had listened, she had believed, and now she was part of the story she had always watched from the sidelines. The rising tension had broken, and in its place was a calm certainty. She belonged here, in this family, and in this house of memories and hopes. The conference room seemed to hold its breath as Mr. Delgado turned the page of the policy and cleared his throat softly. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, and the light through the tall windows had shifted to a gentle gold, painting the room in warm hues. Mara Whitfield sat more upright, her pulse quickening, though she had no idea whether it was hope or dread fueling its rapid beat. Around her, the cousins watched the lawyer's face, as though by reading his expression they could predict the next words. Marcy's fingers tapped a steady rhythm on the table. Jenna chewed her lower lip, and Dale shifted restlessly in his chair. None of them looked at Mara. All were focused on Mr. Delgado's carefully measured breathing. He adjusted his glasses and began reading the clause titled Contingent Beneficiary Provisions. His voice, normally so even, carried a slight tremor that Mara could not place. He spoke of circumstances under which primary beneficiaries might be deemed unable to receive funds: death before the insured, legal disqualification, voluntary refusal. Mara felt her chest tighten when she heard disqualified under Section I's 4A, a phrase that reminded her of whispered family rumors about an old divorce gone unmentioned. Her stomach twisted as she remembered how she had once asked Joanne about the divorce. Her aunt's eyes had grown sad, her lips thin, and she had changed the subject. Now that unspoken chapter felt as heavy as these legal words. In the event that no primary beneficiary is living or qualified, Mr. Delgado continued, the policy proceeds shall pass in their entirety to... He paused. The pause felt endless. Mara's breath caught mid-inhale. She pressed her hands into her lap, letting her fingernails dig into her palms. She noticed the dull rustle of papers as Mr. Delgado shifted his weight. The clock on the wall ticked deliberately, each second stretching longer than the last. Mara's mind raced. Name someone else. Name someone else. Then she heard it. Clear and resonant. Mara Elaine Whitfield, niece of the insured, Eleanor Whitfield. The room seemed to tilt, and for a moment Mara was unsure whether she was looking at her own face reflected off the polished wood table, or at someone else entirely. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might burst. She blinked, wanting to make sure she had heard correctly. When she opened her eyes again, Mr. Delgado's lips were still moving, reading definitions that she now heard as distant echoes rather than immediate reality. A hush fell over the cousins. Marcy's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Jenna sat, so still that Mara could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, almost as if she were holding her breath. Dale's eyes widened. He pressed his palms flat against the table for support. Their surprise was evident, and with it came something else too. She thought she saw a flicker of respect, as if they suddenly understood that this moment belonged to her as much as to anyone. Mara's own mind spun. Memories rushed in, one after the other. Her grandmother's soft voice humming lullabies when Mara was a toddler. The way Eleanor's eyes would crinkle at the corners when she laughed. The afternoons in the sunlit garden, Mara picking flowers while her cousins chased each other around the rose bushes. Those moments felt lost for so long, but now they returned with crisp clarity, filling the space around her like golden petals drifting on a breeze. A single tear escaped and slid down her cheek. She brushed it away, startled by its warmth. Mr. Delgado looked up from the file, meeting Mara's eyes with a gentle nod. That concludes the beneficiary sections, he said. His voice was compassionate, as though he understood more than the cousins did what this moment meant for her. He closed the policy folder with a soft snap and set it on the table. The click of the cover felt like a starting pistol, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Mara inhaled deeply, tasting the faint scent of polished wood and old paper. She realized then that her vision had blurred. The faces around her seemed wavy as if seen through water. She blinked several times, focusing on Marcy, whose usual confident air now seemed shaken. Marcy's cheeks were flushed. She opened, her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. Jenna looked at Mara with wide, questioning eyes as though she had just discovered there was more to her cousin than she had ever known. Dale, usually so reserved, swallowed visibly and gave Mara a slow nod that felt like an unspoken apology. In the silence that followed, Mara's memory drifted back to the rumors she had heard at family gatherings, whispers about a divorce between Eleanor and Mara's mother, Lily, that had never been explained. Stories about a misunderstanding so painful that Eleanor had removed her daughter's name from the will, but never mentioned why. At 13, Mara had begged for details. At 18, she had pored over old letters Joanne had left out for her. At 25, she had accepted that some things in life would remain mysteries. Now she understood that the policy's last clause had been written to right an old wrong, hidden in legal language until the very end. Her Aunt Joanne's face floated before her mind's eye. She remembered the day she had received Joanne's hug after Lily's funeral, Joanne's whispered words, "I will always take care of you, my sweet girl." That promise had been Joanne's alone, spoken in private. But now, in this room, by the authority of the law and the love of a grandmother, Mara was being claimed by the Whitfield legacy in full view of her cousins, claiming a place she had felt she'd lost forever. Mara's legs trembled slightly as she stood. Every eye in the room followed her movement. She felt exposed, as though she were standing in an empty field at dawn, waiting for the sun to rise. She cleared her throat softly. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions. "Thank you, Mr. Delgado, and thank you to all of you." She turned to face her cousins. "I know this is unexpected." A soft hush answered her. "I understand you thought you knew how this would go. I believed the same thing, for years. But it seems our grandmother wanted us all to have our share, and to make sure none of us were left out." Marcy swallowed, looking down at her folded hands. Jenna wiped at her shiny eyes with the corner of her sleeve. Dale's jaw worked as he tried to find words. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant murmur of traffic from the street below. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over her. When she opened them again, she saw something she had never seen before. Her cousins' faces were soft with concern and respect. The old walls between them, built of assumptions and unspoken hurts, felt as though they had crumbled in an instant. Family can be complicated, Mara continued, choosing her words slowly. I know about the divorce, about old mistakes and years of silence. I know it's been hard to understand my place here. She paused, letting those words settle. But I want you all to know I don't think of this as winning or losing. I think of it as belonging, something I've always wanted even when I was too afraid to say it. She looked at Marcy. I'm not here to take away what's rightfully yours. Then she looked at Jenna and Dale. I'm here to share what was always meant to be shared. A small smile curved Mara's lips as she realized how free she felt. The tension that had clung to her chest for years, every whispered conversation, every awkward silence at reunions, had finally lifted. She felt light, as though she could step away from the table and walk into the sunlight outside, where the wheat fields waved in the breeze and the sky stretched wide and welcoming. One by one, her cousins stood. Marcy stepped forward hesitantly, then embraced her, murmuring, I'm sorry, Mara. Jenna followed, wrapping both arms around Mara's shoulders. Dale gave a quiet pat on her back. In those embraces, Mara felt the distance that had once separated them melt away. She realized that the lawyer's last clause had done more than designate a beneficiary. It had opened a door, inviting them all to step through together into a new chapter. As they left the law office side by side, Mara glanced back at the dark wood conference room and the empty chairs. She thought of her grandmother, Eleanor, and of the careful thought she must have given to those words. With a soft smile, Mara whispered, Thank you, Grandma. Then she turned her face to the fading light, ready to walk into whatever came next, together with her family. The cousins walked out into the spring sunshine, their footsteps echoing in the marble-floored lobby as they left the law office. Mara paused by the door, breathing in the warm air scented faintly with flowering trees. Behind her, Marcy, Jenna, and Dale gathered, each holding a copy of the policy folder. The sudden shift from the quiet seriousness of the conference room to the bright bustle of the street felt almost jarring. Marcy was the first to speak. Mara, wait. She drew in a breath and looked into Mara's eyes. I need to say I'm sorry. I never meant for things to be. I never realized how it felt to be left out. Her voice trembled, as though the weight of years of misunderstanding pressed on her chest. Mara smiled gently. I understand, she said softly. I know none of you meant harm. It's just that I always felt I was standing outside watching you all from a distance. She paused, then added, You don't have to apologize. We're all learning, right? Jenna tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I always thought Grandma had her reasons, she confessed. I heard rumors about the divorce with Mom, but no one ever explained. I felt awkward around you. Her eyes welled with tears. I'm really glad this turned out the way it did. Dale, who rarely spoke much, reached out to rest a hand on Mara's shoulder. We all got caught up in what we thought was the truth, he said quietly. But now I see Grandma wanted everyone to be part of this. She didn't want anyone left behind. They clustered together on the sidewalk, the policy folders resting in their laps like small stones of knowledge. Mara looked at each of them, her heart swelling with relief. Maybe we should go somewhere to talk, she suggested. I know a nice cafe around the corner, quiet, with outdoor seating. We can sit and figure out what comes next. They agreed, and soon they were seated around a small bistro table under a striped awning. The cafe's tables were topped with red and white checkered tablecloths, and small pots of daisies sat in the center. A waitress in a simple apron approached, taking their orders for iced lemonade and sandwiches. The city's hum faded to a background murmur as the four of them settled in. Marcy unfolded her policy pages with shaking fingers. Mr. Delgado mentioned Section 4A as a disqualification clause, she said, pointing at the lines. Do any of us qualify as disqualified? I don't think so. But I never really looked at the law part. She sounded both curious and embarrassed. Mara leaned forward. I was thinking the same thing. Maybe we should understand what that clause actually means. She pushed her copy toward Jenna. Maybe I can call Mr. Delgado tomorrow. Ask for clarification. She tapped her finger on the paper. I want to know exactly why we were called disqualified, and how Grandma arranged for the policy to come to me if that happened. Jenna nodded. I'll help, she offered quickly. My friend's dad is a lawyer, too. He said he could explain some legal terms. It might help us understand why Grandma wrote it that way. Dale looked between his sisters. Let's do that, he said. I want to be clear, too, and maybe, once we know more, we can decide together how to handle the funds. It shouldn't all be on Mara. He glanced at Mara, concern shining in his eyes. You don't have to carry that alone. Mara felt a warmth spread through her chest. This wasn't pity or obligation. It was a genuine offer of partnership. Thank you, she said. I was wondering how to even start that conversation. It helps to have you here. They ordered their drinks and sandwiches, chatting in quiet tones. The air was light with the thrill of a new beginning. They spoke of lighter topics. Marcy's upcoming wedding plans, Jenna's new job at a design studio, Dale's project to restore his grandfather's old truck. They laughed at old family stories, like the time their toddler selves had tried to bake cookies and flooded Grandma's kitchen with flour. In those moments, Mara felt the first true closeness she had ever known with her cousins. Later that evening, Mara called Mr. Delgado. His voice was warm and patient over the phone. He explained that Section 4A referred to beneficiaries who had been legally estranged under very specific conditions, things like formal removal from the will due to a legal challenge or conviction of a serious crime against the insured. He assured Mara that none of the primary beneficiaries fell under those conditions. Instead, the clause was a safeguard, ensuring that if family ties were ever broken by court order or criminal wrongdoing, the policy would still have a path. In Grandma Eleanor's case, it seemed she had quietly reconnected with Mara after the divorce, then added the contingent clause to honor their bond even if no one else knew. Mara shared what she learned the next morning at a family breakfast at Joanne and Peter's farmhouse. The cousins gathered around the long kitchen table, where fresh honey from Aunt Joanne's bees was drizzled over hot biscuits. Mara recounted Delgado's words, and Jenna explained the law friend's more detailed take. That per stirpes distribution meant the money would flow down the family line evenly, honoring each branch of the family equally. Grandma was clever, Jenna said, shaking her head in wonder as she poured syrup. She wrote the clause so no matter what happened, your branch of the family would always have a claim. Marcy reached across the table, covering Mara's hand with her own. That's just like her, she said softly. She loved tradition, but she also understood people. They sat together, eating biscuits and honey, and made a plan. Mara would set up the inheritance account in her name, but the cousins would be co-signers, ensuring they all had access. They agreed to meet with a financial advisor to discuss using part of the funds to restore the old Whitfield family home, another part to establish a small scholarship in Eleanor's name for art history students, and a portion to be divided equally among themselves. I love the scholarship idea, Mara said, smiling. It ties back to what I do and it honors Grandma here. She tapped her temple lightly. And it's something we can build together. Yes, Marcy said. And the house restoration will let us create a real family gathering place. No more feeling like I'm an outsider. Her eyes glistened with excitement. Over the next few weeks, they moved forward with steady determination. On a Saturday morning, the four cousins drove together to the downtrodden Whitfield homestead on the edge of town. Vines crept up the crumbling. Brick walls, the porch sagged, and windows were streaked with dust. Yet Mara saw beyond the decay. She saw the shining possibility of laughter in the empty rooms, of canvases set up in the grand parlor, of grandchildren running through the garden. They walked through room after room, noting what needed repair: broken floorboards, peeling paint, a collapsed section of the roof. But at the center of it all was the grand staircase, its wood balustrade still sturdy, its banister swept in gentle curves. Mara placed her hand on the polished wood. She felt a shiver of connection to her grandmother and to the many Whitfields who had climbed these steps over the years. "Let's do this," Mara said. "We'll hire a contractor, set a budget, and start restoring this place." Jenna pulled out her phone and began taking photos. "I'll help document everything," she said. "We can share progress with the family." Dale crouched down to inspect a broken floorboard. "I could learn carpentry for this," he offered, already imagining the work. "I could patch up these floors myself under supervision." Marcy laughed. "I'll handle the paint and landscaping. I've always loved garden design." They stood in a circle in the dusty sunshine, each of them brimming with ideas. A new spirit of collaboration had arisen, turning what once had felt like an inheritance battle into a joint project, a way to rebuild something tangible for the entire family. Back at Mara's small apartment later that day, the cousins reviewed budgets, scholarship criteria, and contractor bids over pizza boxes and coffee mugs. They made lists, sent emails, and divided tasks. It was ordinary teamwork, but it felt extraordinary, because it was their shared vision coming to life. Evenings were filled with laughter and discussion. Mara painted sketches of the house's possible color schemes. Jenna mocked up a logo for the scholarship. Dale watched tutorial videos on carpentry, and Marcy scribbled plant lists for the garden. In those moments, the old ache of exclusion that had followed Mara all her life was gone. In its place was a sense of purpose and belonging. By the time the first contractor arrived to shore up the foundation, the cousins were side by side, reviewing blueprints. They walked the property together, swapping stories of childhood adventures, of ghost stories told around the fireplace, of pillow fights in the upstairs hallway, of spring picnics on the lawn. Each story wove them closer, stitching together the years of distance. That night, Mara lay in bed thinking about how a single clause in a legal document had changed everything. What had once seemed like cold, impersonal writing had revealed a grandmother's hidden love. Mara closed her eyes with a peaceful smile, knowing that the policy's last clause had done more than distribute money. It had brought her family back together, rewriting their bonds in a way no lawsuit or will could ever have done. And in that knowledge, Mara finally felt the full meaning of family. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the newly restored Whitfield parlor, casting soft, warm patterns on the polished oak floor. Mara Whitfield stood near the entrance, smoothing the folds of her summer dress and taking a deep breath. Today was the day they would hold the very first Eleanor Whitfield Memorial Scholarship ceremony, and the old house felt as eager as she was. Outside, the garden bloomed in bright colors, marigolds, lavender, and climbing roses that Marcy had planted just weeks ago. The air smelled sweet, and the soft buzz of bees drifted up from the flower beds. Cousins Jenna and Dale hovered nearby, making final checks. Jenna arranged the certificates on a small table draped in white linen, while Dale tested the microphone, clearing his throat into it and smiling sheepishly when his voice echoed. Marcy flitted between the parlor and the garden doorway, straightening ribbons and making sure the flower pots were evenly spaced. Their laughter and busy footsteps filled the space with life, a happy contrast to the hushed quiet the house had known for years. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the dusty rooms they had first seen last spring, the peeling wallpaper, the sagging ceiling, the broken windows. Now, fresh paint gleamed on the walls, furniture had been refinished, and sunlight streamed unhindered through clear glass. They had worked so hard, Marcy designing the garden, Dale learning carpentry to fix floors, Jenna handling publicity, and Mara coordinating budgets and paperwork. This house, once silent and forgotten, seemed to hum with memories rediscovered and new ones waiting to bloom. A gentle knock on the parlor door made Mara open her eyes. It was Mr. Delgado, the family attorney, carrying a small stack of programs for the ceremony. He smiled warmly. "Good morning, Ms. Whitfield." I hope I'm not too early. His silver hair caught the light as he nodded toward Mara. Thank you for coming, Mara said. We're just finishing up. She took the papers from him and showed them to her cousins. These are the programs, they look great. They were simple. A white card with gold lettering, listing the order of events, and a brief note about Eleanor Whitfield's love for art and family. Beneath it was an outline of the new scholarship fund, and at the bottom the names of Mara's cousins and herself as the founding committee. Jenna's name sat next to Mara's, Marcy's and Dale's followed. For the first time, Mara's name was on something official alongside her cousins. Outside, a small group of neighbors, friends, and a few distant Whitfield relatives began to arrive. Some carried bouquets of wildflowers, others held notebooks or cameras. A banner had been strung between two trees, reading, Whitfield Memorial Scholarship, in honor of Eleanor Whitfield. Mara glanced at it, feeling a gentle thrill. The ceremony began with a short speech from Marcy. She stood on the top step of the porch, her voice clear and full of pride. Welcome, everyone, she said, to the first annual Eleanor Whitfield Memorial Scholarship Ceremony. Grandma Eleanor believed in the power of art and family, and through this scholarship, we hope to honor her memory by supporting young students who share her passion. She paused, looking down the line of guests, then turned to Mara. I'd like to introduce my cousin, the heart behind this project, Mara Whitfield. Mara stepped forward, her heart thumping softly. She felt the breeze tug at her hair and saw the hopeful faces in the crowd. She remembered how it had felt to sit in that law office, certain she would be excluded, and how shock and joy had collided when her name was read. Now, several months later, she stood here as an equal member of this family, ready to speak her truth. Thank you, Marcy, Mara began, her voice steady. And thank you all for being here today. She cleared her throat. When I first came back to this house, it felt broken, like a story missing its ending. But with the help of my cousins, these walls have been filled again with laughter, with stories, and with new dreams. The scholarship we celebrate today is more than an award. It is a promise that creativity will be nurtured, that family bonds will be strengthened, and that no one will ever feel alone in this legacy. She gestured to the garden. Just beyond us is the garden Marcy designed, and inside the rooms that Dale and I helped to restore, Jenna has captured every step of this journey for our family archives. She smiled at each cousin in turn, feeling gratitude swell inside her. This project brought us together. It taught us that inheritance is not only about money or property. It is about sharing our love, our skills, and our time, it is about knowing that we belong and that we owe it to each other to build something lasting. Mara paused as soft applause rose from the crowd. She felt her eyes grow misty, but she held her ground. Among the guests, she saw her Aunt Joanne and Uncle Peter, their faces beaming. Mara thought of her mother's quiet strength and of Eleanor's wise determination. She felt their spirits there with her, cheering. After a few more words, Mara invited the first scholarship recipient to the front. A shy teenager named Lila stepped up, clutching her art portfolio. Lila's eyes shone with excitement as Mara handed her the certificate and a small check. Cameras clicked and Lila thanked Mara with a heartfelt hug. Mara felt a thrill of joy at Lila's pride. This was why they had done it, to give a student like Lila a chance to pursue her dreams. Once the formalities ended, everyone mingled in the garden. Guests admired Marcy's flowers, complimented Dale on the oak banister he had restored, and chatted with Jenna about the photos she had taken. Mara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, answering questions about the scholarship, application process, and listening to stories from old Whitfield cousins she had never met before. They spoke of Eleanor's childhood adventures, of the family's early days in this very house, and of traditions they hoped to revive. By mid-afternoon, the garden party had settled into a comfortable hum. Mara found herself standing beside her cousins near a wooden bench. They watched as children chased each other through the flower beds, and as older relatives sipped lemonade under a willow tree. The sun felt warm on their faces. Marcy leaned in and whispered, "We did it! Look at this place!" Jenna nodded, her camera hanging around her neck. "It's perfect." Dale offered Mara a playful nudge. Next year I'm building you a studio for those paintings you've been promising to hang. Mara laughed, delighted at the thought. She felt a hand slip into hers. It was Joanne. You've done something wonderful here, her aunt said, softly. I'm proud of you, all of you. Mara squeezed Joanne's hand, feeling the warmth of family love. She thought of her mother Lily, and of the way Aunt Joanne had raised her with gentle care. Thank you, Mara said. I wouldn't be here without you. As the sun dipped lower, the gathering began to wind down. Guests waved goodbye, promising to return for the next reunion. The last of the lemonade was poured, and the flower. Pots were gathered for shelter as a few clouds drifted in. Mara and her cousins helped pack up the tables and chairs, talking about what they'd do differently next year. More music, perhaps, and a small art exhibition inside the parlor. That evening, after the guests had left and the garden lay quiet, Mara sat on the front porch steps with her cousins. They sipped cool water from glass bottles and watched the fireflies flicker in the twilight. The house stood behind them, proud and full of history and life. The soft crickets sang, and the sky shifted to deep purples and blues. I never thought I'd feel so at home here, Mara said, her voice almost a whisper. Not until that last clause was read. But now this feels like my home in every way. Jenna rested her head on Mara's shoulder. You belong here as much as anyone, she said gently, and you've given this family something we'll remember forever. Marcy smiled, her eyes reflecting the fireflies. We started something amazing together. Dale nodded, gazing at the house. It's only the beginning. Mara closed her eyes and breathed in the night air. She felt a deep peace settle in her heart. The journey from outsider to equal had been full of surprises and hard moments, but it had led her here, to a place where she was seen, heard, and loved. She thought of her grandmother Eleanor, whose careful words in that policy had set it all in motion. And she felt grateful, knowing that the legacy of love and creativity would continue for generations to come. As the first stars appeared overhead, Mara whispered, "Good night, Grandma." And with that, she stood, ready to walk inside and join the laughter that would fill these rooms for years ahead.